Hello, my friends. Welcome to this week's episode of The Formula, where we break down and explore the elements of achievement in world-class performers. I'm your host, Trevor Carlson, and this week I had the opportunity to sit down with B Leaderly's Jo Miller. Jo is a women's leadership speaker who has given talks around the globe at all kinds of huge tech companies, including eBay, and spoken at a lot of other women's leadership events. I have a lot of fun chatting with Jo, especially when she starts talking about dingoes and wombats. She's a lot of fun and has a ton of experience that she takes the time to share with you on this episode. So relax, turn your volume up, and let's get this thing started with Jo Miller. Jo, do you wanna maybe talk a little bit about what the best tip you would give to someone who's looking to get into women's leadership speaking?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Trevor. And by the way, thanks for inviting me to be a guest on your podcast. And so not just being a women's leadership speaker, but as someone that makes their living as a speaker in general, I would say the number one tip, and something I'm sure we'll explore in a little bit of depth as time goes on, is to really identify a truly unique niche for yourself that you can own and build thought leadership in. So own that expertise in a truly unique way, and then do what you can to not distract yourself so you can stay within that niche.
Right, absolutely. I think this is a conversation that we have had before about niching down, figuring out what it is that you're focusing on, and then really just make everything around that. Because you've turned down, I think I've heard you turn down speaking gigs or other things that just weren't lined up with where you were at, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the mistakes that people make a lot starting out is having that scarcity mentality, which is completely understandable if you're just embarking in a new career or a new business. You're hungry for experience and probably more so for revenue. And yet, if you try to be all things to all people, what I find is paradoxically you end up being nothing to anyone. You never
Right.
make a stand. You never stand out.
Yeah, so how would you recommend somebody really focus on a small area or get started niching down, I guess, for lack of a better term?
Yeah. Narrow the focus or niche down. I like that phrase. Most people have heard of a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins, and in it he talks about what sets world-class companies aside from less successful competitors and peers. And he talks about the hedgehog concept, which is that the most successful companies in their space do something that they're truly passionate about, that they can also be highly skilled and world class at, but also, serve a really thriving market. And so what I did for myself and what I recommend others do for themselves is to, apply that hedgehog concept to yourself. So to look for what is it that you're truly passionate about, what things get you fired up or angry, or, what was the last thing that you read or heard that moved you to tears, for example. So what are your passions? And then line that up with what are the skills and strengths and talents that you bring, that you have today, or that you could become truly world class in if you were to really focus on building those skills. But unfortunately, what happens a lot is people think that they can build a great career or a great business around just those two things. What are your passions? What are your talents? But unfortunately, focusing on those two could just be a recipe for having an expensive hobby. And no one wants that for you. I don't want that for you. So you need the third area, which is to really understand, who is out there that really needs and wants and values what you could offer, so that if you were to provide that service for them, you'd be truly sought after. And so if you can somehow maneuver into a space and build expertise and build thought leadership around doing something that you're passionate about, that fits your skill set and your strengths and talents, but also has you provide a much needed service. To me, that's your niche. And the more narrowly you can focus on that, I think the further you'll go and the more successful you'll be.
Yeah, that sounds like great advice that, at different points in time I probably could have applied a little bit to what I'm doing or what I was doing in the past. I want to circle back on a couple things because you said a lot of really good stuff, and I didn't want to interrupt you. You mentioned something about scarcity mindset. Do you have a process or I guess a way that you have overcome a scarcity mindset, or an example of someone, or maybe a story that you have of someone moving past that and into more of an abundance mindset?
Ooh, not off the top of my head, but if I was to, come up with a tip or two around overcoming scarcity mindset, one of the things to do is just hang out with people who are already doing what you aspire to do, because that's the great reminder that it is a big, abundant world out there. If you kind of sit on your own and dwell on stuff for too long, it
Right.
becomes self-fulfilling prophecy, this downward spiral. Whereas if you step out and say, you know what, there are people out there doing any number of incredibly uniquely narrowly niched things and thriving and building incredible businesses and careers. And so I think if you just step out and surround yourself with people that are doing amazing, unique, interesting things, it's a great reminder that the world really is an abundant place.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a recommendation for how to get started finding those people?
Oh gosh, you know what? I the internet is a wonderful place. Start Googling people in similar fields to yourself and reach out. And you know, um, most really successful people have gotten to where they are based on mentoring and having been mentored and sponsored by others. And at some point, most people get to a point in their life and career where they've built something up and they've been doing what they do for a certain amount of time, and they recognize that it's time now to turn around and pay it forward and start to lift others up. So if you were to find 10 people that you really admire in the space that you aspire to move into and reach out to a bunch of them, one or two are going to have to respond at some point.
Right.
As busy as I am, there are certain times of the year when I'm incredibly busy, but then I take a bit of downtime. And one of the things I really enjoy doing is connecting with aspiring speakers or coaches and people that are just starting out, because it helps me reflect on what I'm doing well, and it's really satisfying to pay it forward and give back. But it also just keeps me humble and keeps me in check and reminds me that uh, everyone starts out from zero.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that I've found. I do a little bit of mentoring for some college students, and I'll be sitting there and they'll ask me a question and I'll give them some advice, and then I'll sit there for a second and be like, man, I should probably start listening to my own advice on this, because it's easy to give advice, but it's much harder to like take your own advice, I found at some points in time. So it's kind of nice to have that experience where you have the opportunity to provide, give back, but also maybe you're learning a little bit from yourself.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about let's dive more into a little bit into how you got into your speaking career in the first place. You want to walk me through the journey from you, because you're not from the U.S. You what's the right term? I want to say migrated, but that's not the right one. You came from Australia to the U.S. We'll just put it at that. You want to walk me through the journey that you went through?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I actually started out, if we were to wind the clock back 20 years ago, I started out in a corporate career myself and was very ambitious and wanted to climb the corporate ladder and maneuvered into a role in a company that I thought I wanted to spend the rest of my career. And quickly found that I bumped up against my own ceiling, which was that for all my ambition, I probably lacked a bit of polish and professionalism, and definitely didn't have a graceful approach to navigating office politics. And so I reached out to get some coaching myself, because of just some tough situations that I was coming up against. And hired a coach and worked with her for about 3 months, and just found it so incredibly valuable that it led to me being much more successful and kind of opening up a new division of a new role within the company that I was working on, that I proposed to my boss, and starting to see some real success there. And then my coach said to me, Jo, she was part of a coaching company that was doing some training, and she said, Jo, I think this would really be valuable for you in your career, and because you aspire to move into management. And so I ended up going to the coach training class and found it just so intriguing that within about 2 months, I told my boss I was quitting my job to go start a little coaching company.
Wow.
And, right, I know. So I became a corporate escapee at a fairly young age compared to most coaches. Within a couple years, discovered that I was possibly not the best person best suited for individual coaching, and that I tend to be a little bit impatient with people and their problems and stuff. But what I discovered through the process of coaching a lot of other women in similar situations to my own was that I had a real I was really intrigued by what were the factors that allowed women to advance in their corporate careers and move up the corporate ladder, so to speak, and succeed in management and leadership roles. And so that just had always intrigued me, possibly because of my own, failure to really achieve that in my own career.
Right.
But that really drove me. And so I started to really narrow in on coaching women, and I'd moved from Australia to Silicon Valley at that point, and so just by proximity was coaching a lot of women in tech companies, and started to develop a real understanding for the challenges that they faced, and some of the roadblocks that they were coming up against as they navigated their careers, but also the solutions that they were creating, just some really creative ways that they were skilling up and making their value visible and moving ahead. And when one of my clients solved a problem for themselves and started to move forward, I'd find myself saying, well, could I go tell 10 other people what you just did? Because I think that would be really valuable. And from there, I started to just notice my natural affinity for creating content and delivering more instructor-led training. And around that time, the coaching company that I had trained with realized that I was in the United States, and I became their lead trainer here. And even though the first time I led a workshop, people actually quit because I was so awful.
Oh, no.
I mean, how just excruciatingly, embarrassingly painful. But at the same time, when I led teleconference trainings, I got really great feedback. So much so that a couple male CEOs that took one of my teleconference series hired me as their coach, and really encouraged me to pursue more teleconference but in-person training. And one of them actually gave me great feedback and said, Jo, my challenge to you is to become as effective as a trainer in person as you are in a teleseminar. So with that, I just started to look for opportunities to put myself in that really uncomfortable spot of doing more public speaking, and just any opportunity I had. And a few years went by, and by 2006 and 2007, I was getting opportunities to speak at women's leadership conferences, and a couple of those went so well that people in the room just came up and said, look, could you come into my company and do this? And in that moment, I feel like a whole new career was born.
Oh, wow. Do you think that process of, just putting yourself out there as much as possible really jump-started your trajectory or your growth?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think for anyone that wants to make their living as a speaker, or just supplement what they do. So speaking is a really great way to build any type of business, because most people are terrified of it and can't do it well. So I think it's absolutely worth just going through the pain and the ordeal. It's really harrowing. I wasn't someone who ever imagined they would make their living doing this. If you asked me at 15 years old, Jo, do you think it's possible you'd make your living from public speaking one day? I think my heart literally would have stopped. Like I would have died. I was that terrified. But it's truly worth, picking up the skills and moving through that fear and uncomfortableness. And I remember saying to myself, look, if I do this 100 times, after the 100th time, I bet I don't feel as awful and terrified anymore.
Yeah, do you think that's the general rule of thumb, is just to shoot for 100?
You know what? If people even just challenge themselves to do this once a month, a year from today, you've probably got to be a bit better and less terrified.
Yeah, so that's exactly what one of the most recent guests said, Paul Singh. He was like, just get up on stage once a month, and I promise you, within like a year or two, you'll probably be one of the better speakers on whatever circuit is or whatever your industry is.
That's a great rule of thumb.
Right. You had mentioned something earlier. Let me see if I can remember, because I was like, all right, I feel like this is really important stuff. But you had mentioned that um, you had started getting a lot of different referrals, and you were sharing a lot of the success stories of people that had worked with you before. So let's assume that someone's at the early stages of their speaking career. Is that the strategy you would give them for building their business, or looking for more of a way to get their message out?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. A couple additional strategies. Well, there's a couple. I think there's a couple of things if we pull it apart here. One is becoming more confident and compelling as a speaker. So that's one piece, building your speaking skills and ability. The other is around building a business. But maybe let's just address the first piece, which is just building up that skill. One of the things I always recommend is Toastmasters, because Toastmasters is just an incredible organization that gives you very down to earth but immediate feedback on how you're doing in very practical ways that you can improve. And so joining a Toastmasters group and just stumbling across one that was really supportive was truly instrumental in me becoming a better speaker. Now, choose your Toastmasters group carefully, because not all of them are supportive. I heard of one that is for professional public speakers, and they can be a bit so if you find a Toastmasters group and they are mean, run for the hills, find a supportive one.
Go find a more supportive Toastmasters group.
Hey, exactly. And so I got great feedback and got to give other speakers feedback. And there just came a point where people said, look, you should be doing this more. So it was that great encouragement. And then another great tip, and I learned this later, but it's such a good one. A speaker called Ed Tate told me this terrific tip, which is, get yourself on video speaking. And by the way, this will be the most uncomfortable thing you ever do as a speaker. Just watching yourself, as you probably can relate to, Trevor, or listening to yourself is just awfully painful. But if you can get, 3 minutes of video of yourself presenting to a group, or even just, presenting alone in a room doing your thing, watch it first with the sound turned down and notice your gestures and facial expressions and body language, and just make note of anything that's distracting or repetitive or takes away from, the message you want to convey. Then turn the sound up and sort of block off the video so you're not looking at the screen, and just listen for those verbal tics that you might have, the ums and the ahs and the, which is also a really distracting one for your audience. But just make note of feedback for yourself on that, and then finally put the two together and give yourself feedback. And you can hire, the most highly paid speaking coach in the world, and I don't think they'll give you feedback as valuable as what you'll give yourself just doing that, that 15-minute exercise.
Yeah, and I would add one to that, just from what I've learned from just doing this podcast, and that is, record yourself speaking and then go back and edit it yourself, because that will, oh man, that's a very unique form of torture for yourself that will make you clean up your speaking habits very quickly.
Yes, and editing out every little in a 1 hour podcast is a special form of torture, isn't it?
Oh my God, yeah. There's, I've cleaned up a lot of the stuff that I used to do. Now I'm working on like my level 2 version of cleaning up my podcast speaking, but I've successfully eliminated my like before every question. So yeah, if you wanna get better at speaking, record yourself talking for an hour and then edit it, and you will very, very quickly clean it up. So moving past some of those tips, so back in '06, you had said that you were getting out and doing like the public speaking circuit. What happened between 2006 and now? Let's fill in the rest of the story there. How did you get to? Because you're still doing full-time speaking, and you have an online community that you've built. How did you get from there to here?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And so just to put some numbers behind it, I deliver about 70 speaking presentations per year. Most of them are in the United States, though I do probably one or two international every year. But that includes webinars as well. So I have a webinar series I deliver 6 times a year, and so that keeps me very busy. And so around 2006 and 2007, what happened was people who'd seen me, deliver a workshop for a local Silicon Valley Women in HR association or something similar, referred me to a couple conferences, the Women in Computing conference run by the Anita Borg Institute, and then the Society of Women Engineers annual conference. And on the heels of those two successes, I just decided one day that I was going to sit down and Google women's leadership professional conferences and really not leave the chair until I'd reached out to, and I forget what the number was. It was 50 or 100, so a big number. So I was just going to look up who these conferences were and introduce myself as a speaker via email with a little flyer that I'd created, and just sit there until I'd reached out and met my number. And it pretty much took me all weekend, and it didn't happen immediately, but what started to happen was people would get back to me. And so for the first few years, as I transitioned from individual coaching to, more being a speaker and workshop leader, keynote speaker, etc., I would do that probably every 6 months. And like I said, it didn't yield immediate results, but it just created this slow, steady build in the number of engagements that I was invited to deliver. And then it just dawned on me a few years ago that I hadn't done that in quite a while, because speaking is its own marketing technique as time goes by. When I speak at a large conference to, 600 or 800 or 1,200 people, guaranteed there's going to be a handful of people and enjoyed what I had to say.
Yeah.
And to say, hey, could you come to my company and do this? Or, have you ever spoken at this other conference? So it sort of becomes its own perpetual marketing machine. So every once in a while, I'll go back to the old, Google 50 conferences, but not nearly as frequently as I used to.
Yeah. And I lost my train of thought there for a second, but you've been out doing the speaking tour. And eventually you kind of transitioned into building this online community around leadership called Be Leaderly. Do you want to talk about what Be Leaderly is and how that kind of stemmed off of your speaking career?
Yes. And I'll be completely honest about what inspired me, what motivated me to start Be Leaderly. And it was actually a completely different project. So I'm fairly unique among people that do speaking full time for a living, in that I've never written a book, and I've always known that I needed to write a book, but never quite got around to it. And so as I was thinking, boy, I really need to write this book, because now, people will hire me to speak and say, and we'll buy 500 copies of your book, and I'll have to gently break it to them that there's only one problem with that there is no book. So like, okay, I need to write a book and I would need to get a publisher. But before I do that, I want to build more of a following.
Mm-hmm.
I had a certain number of Twitter and Facebook followers and a newsletter list of around 5,000 or 7,000 people, which was a good start. So I thought, before I approach a publisher, I really want to build a much larger community. And so being someone who loves to create content, I thought, well, a great way to do that would be to have a blog. So the idea of the blog Be Leaderly was born in 2014. And it became this place where I could, post little pieces of content. So once a week, I'll post a motivational quote from one of the women leaders in my circle. So a quote that you've not heard before from someone you're probably not already aware of, but has some great resonance for women for their career and leadership development. So there'll be a motivational quote every Monday. And then one or two more blog posts during the year, something related to how to lead and climb and thrive as a rising woman of influence in the corporate world. And so that really took off. And the following really grew from maybe 30 or 40,000 up to probably 260,000 now. And my newsletter list went from 10 to probably, I think it's around 24,000 now. And so rather than ever get round to writing the book, which was really just a strategy ultimately to increase my speaker fee, Be Leaderly and that blog and the increased following got me to the increased speaker fee. So sadly, and I'm kind of ashamed to admit this, I haven't written the book yet.
And we'll get back to that later about your process of writing a book. But I'm sure that it's gonna come out and it's gonna do really well. Just like I don't know, it seems like everything that you've done so far has had a very high level of success, at least from my perspective. So I'm excited for the book to come out. But let's talk about some of your strategies with Be Leaderly and kind of the. I mean, you talked about the purpose, but so as you're running and building this community, because it grew fairly quickly, at least from an outsider's perspective. So it must have resonated really well with your audience.
Thanks. I think so. And everything that I do in terms of content or the programs I deliver, keynotes, workshops, webinars, all come from what I hope is a really deep understanding of my core audience, which is women that are early career and mid-level in a corporate career. So I'm not talking to high school women on how to be successful or senior executives. I'm really narrowly focused on this audience, and really want to get to know them. And so in terms of creating content around that, I find it fairly easy because after every session I deliver, someone will come up with a question, and maybe it's a question I haven't thought about or addressed before. So that might end up being a new webinar topic or a blog post, or, seeking out a leader that I can interview around that. And so I'm really, really passionate about creating content, but just with this really narrow focus around truly solving the biggest challenges around my core audience. And I get so passionate about that, Trevor, that I've actually completely forgotten what your question was.
Well, let's talk more about the biggest challenges with your audience. What are the biggest challenges for women early on in their careers? And a follow-up question to that is, how do you help them solve those problems?
And so I think, so actually let's leave aside the really big one that's in the media right now, which is this issue of bias and women being overlooked and not recognized. And for people listening to this podcast in the future, this is the week when that whole big deal with the Google engineer and his online manifesto really exploded and sort of opened up this giant festering wound, which is how women are really treated within tech companies. So leaving that issue aside, because I think it's one that's not one that individual women can necessarily solve for themselves. It's more of a systemic thing that has to come from a collaboration between top leadership and steering corporate culture in the tech industry. I try to have a focus on what individual women can do to navigate their own career in their workforce. And so some of the things that constantly come up are, the big one that really held me back, which was understanding office politics and what are the unwritten rules of the game, so to speak, and, who are the key players and the key influencers in your organization. So I have a mapping exercise that I share in my workshops that helps people get a better understanding of the lay of the land around them, and where they fit within that, the human landscape in their organization. And building off of that, what a lot of people start to see is that there are gaps in their networks, that there are opportunities to build much stronger networks, and not just adding random human beings to your network, having a really strategic and focused networking plan where you're engaging with people who are those mentors and sponsors and advocates and influencers who can connect you with opportunities and help you influence your big idea or project that you're trying to lead. So having a really strategic and focused networking approach based on what your most important career and leadership goals are. And then doing, much of what you and I are speaking about, Trevor, which is understanding your niche. What are you passionate about? what are your strengths, but what do you have to offer to your company that could be your truly unique value proposition that has you be sought after, and narrowing the focus in your career and coming up with a really strong and compelling leadership brand around that. So those are the big ones. And then I would also say just some influencing without authority skills, so that no matter what level or position you're in, can you lead and inspire and engage and motivate others to collaborate with you? Because then you're able to make something happen, make something great happen that's bigger than you could accomplish alone. So that in a nutshell are probably the top 4 or 5 ones.
Yeah, that's great career advice I think it's for really anyone that's at any point in their career if they're looking to advance. I've never worked in like a large corporation, so this is from my small perspective of that. Uh, where would you, so let's just say step one, because you covered a lot of awesome stuff. If somebody's listening to this and they're like, okay, well, that's all awesome stuff. What is the first thing I need to do in order to start um, following your advice that you just laid out to overcome these problems?
I'll return to this idea of office politics. Office politics can be the number one career killer, the thing that prevents people from, being their best, reaching their potential, coming to work feeling happy and satisfied every day. So there's a very quick exercise you can do. I call it the shadow organization map. I'll talk people through it. And, if you go to beleaderly.com, which is my blog, and just type in shadow organization into the search bar, you'll find a little video of me delivering this. But briefly, just draw a picture of your org chart, including between 5 and 10 people that you work with most every day. And then on top of that map, and maybe you want to get a different color for each of these elements, draw solid lines connecting the people that have good, strong relationships, and dashed lines for the broken relationships, so you can start to see who gets along with whom and who doesn't. And always ask yourself why. Like, why do they get along or not get along? And then just put arrows showing which way influence flows in those relationships. Then put a circle around any groups that have formed strong coalitions. And again, step away from any stereotypes. Like I'll often hear people say, oh, that's the boys' network. No, don't say that. That disempowers you. Take a closer look and ask, how did this group form and what do they have in common? Is it an academic or professional background or interest? And just ask yourself, what binds this group together, and what can I do to work effectively with these people? And then just note any people that are truly key influencers, and they might be at any level of the organization, but who are the people really leading change and making stuff happen regardless of the role and level that they're in? And then finally, are there any chains of sponsorship that rise up through the levels of the organization? So where a person's manager is opening doors for them and connecting them with opportunities and helping them grow, just maybe put a little ladder in between those two people to say this is like a ladder of sponsorship. And then just ask yourself, what have I learned from this that I might do a little differently? And what you'll probably see from, really diving into that exercise is there are ways for you to build stronger relationships and coalitions and seek out mentors and sponsors and influencers to help you be more successful. So, before taking any other step, I think just get the lay of the land and understand a bit more about the organization that you're in is a really powerful step.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like if I'm understanding everything correctly, is like taking ownership of what you can do to build those relationships instead of, like you mentioned, the disempowering statements. Like it's really you taking ownership of how you can either provide more value or what you can learn, basically action items for how you can move your career forward.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, one of the number one, bumper sticker statements that I'll share in one of my trainings is don't wait for someone to come empower you or develop you or promote you, but rather take charge of your own career trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's awesome advice, just maybe even for whatever field anybody is in, whether it's in business or not. Let's move on a little bit to man, we covered speaking already, and I thought you did a great job on that. So if anybody wants to become a speaker, just listen to Joe's advice earlier in the episode. But you do a ton of traveling. What really led you into that lifestyle of, because you put in a lot of work and then you kind of hit the road traveling all over the world. Every time I talk to you, you're headed somewhere new. So what led you to that lifestyle?
Well, you know what? I think there's something about being Australian. So wherever you go in the world, wherever you travel, you will find Australians. And I honestly don't know why. I mean, if you look at the map, it's this kind of rather large island continent, just all out there on its own in the Southern Hemisphere. And yet, we Australians just love to travel. So, and I think when I was in college, I had friends that would just take off over the summer break and go to these amazing places. And I wanted to do the same thing. So it was always just in the back of my mind that travel was something I wanted to do more of. Now, as much as I travel for work, as soon as I'm not traveling for work and business, the first thing I want to do is travel for fun, because I feel like it just kind of it brings everything back into perspective. It's a reminder that it's just a great, big, amazing world out there. And as much as the human race, we all have our differences, right? And sometimes it's really easy to dwell on that, especially if you spend too much time, reading the news or time on Twitter. But what I find every time is people are just incredibly, remarkably, boringly the same wherever you go in the world. We all have the same goals. We want to keep our families safe, make a living, contribute, laugh, enjoy life. And travel is just a great way to be reminded of that.
Yeah, do you have a favorite place that you like to go to?
Oh my gosh. You know what? It's always just, where is the last place I went? So I just got back from, I had a week in Hawaii with a girlfriend from Australia, because apparently Hawaii is a great midpoint between Iowa and Australia. So nice.
Right.
It's equally easy to get to. And then from there, a week in Glacier National Park in Montana, which was just remarkable. And, if you care about glaciers, go see them soon, because I think 13 years is all you've got.
Oh wow.
Yeah, right. And so, but, which is another good point about travel, I think. So you never know when the world's going to change. So get out and see it now. I was in Turkey a little over a year ago, and actually flew from Istanbul airport to Cappadocia the same evening that, later after our flight left, there was a suicide bombing at the Istanbul airport. And it just reminded me that the world can change in a moment, in an instant. And to me, the message there is not, some people take away from that to cower in fear and, stay safe and at home. But I think the message is the opposite. Get out and see the world and experience places and people, because you never know from moment to moment when the world might pivot.
Right. Do you think that that's just good life advice in general? Because that's what it sounds like to me. Like
I
just
use it to justify my travel addiction.
no, yeah, that's something that I wish I would have heard when I was younger, because a lot of it was just like, all right, can you just like make it through class? Can you just make it to college? Can you just graduate from college? And I think it's an important lesson that gets missed a lot, is like none of this stuff is guaranteed. So it's like, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? How do you want to live? And then just trying it out and see if it works. I mean, you can always change your mind.
Yes, grab your passport and go and get it stamped.
Right. Do you so let's say somebody that works in corporate right now, or I'm sure that there's people that approach you all the time. They're like, Joe, I really want to travel. How do I get started?
Do you mean get started traveling, or get started in a job that allows you to travel?
Well, maybe that is the first step, is like get a job that allows you to travel.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and for people in a corporate career, getting international experience, if you're able to do that, if you're at a phase in your life and career where you are portable, getting international experience is an incredible momentum pick me up for your career trajectory. And so if you're lucky enough to be a part of a large global organization, or one with affiliates in different countries, pull out the map of locations and spin the globe and pick a place and pitch to your leadership or your mentor, and see if you're able to get some international experience. And many of the very seasoned, very successful leaders that I've spoken to come back to being flexible in terms of location and international experience in being a big leap forward for themselves in their careers.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what it is about people who spend a lot of time traveling, but I just always find them to be just more, I don't want to, interesting is the word that comes to mind, but I feel like they're more open to experiences. They're more friendly. They're just kind of like more, they seem more like go with the flow a little bit.
Yeah, I think to travel, you need to be flexible and easygoing, but also have a sense of curiosity and adventure too. And I'd say some of the best friends that I have all over the world are people I've met traveling because they have those qualities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's like in college I remember becoming friends with a lot of foreign exchange students, and I never really knew why until I thought about it recently. I was like, oh, because they just dropped everything and came over to a new country for 4 years by themselves. So they're probably just really interesting people in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And only become more so because of travel. Sometimes I'm in an airport and I see the people getting really frustrated, the travel rageaholics, and I think to myself, if this is so painful for you, why wouldn't you just stay home?
Right. Yeah, this could be a lot easier on you if you just, didn't travel.
Yeah, a lot easier than on all of us, I think.
Yeah. So there was something that you said in a conversation. I don't know. At some point in time, I made a note of it though. So you said it took you 15 years to become an overnight success. What does that mean?
Ha, yes, you picked up on that. So, um, it, there's a lot of pressure when you're starting a business or an entrepreneur to move fast and scale up and get funding and build a team and grow something big. And that just never fit for me. Honestly, I move kind of slow. I move painfully slow. I'm more of a glacial style of
Yeah.
building. In the early years, you might not have seen a lot of movement, but things were going on below the surface. And looking back, what I see is a lot of advice, especially being in the Silicon Valley area, a lot of advice that it was someone else's advice based on their opinion of what worked for them. And I think it was really important to realize that for me, moving more slowly and deliberately and incrementally has, led to this great point that I'm at right now. From Australia, so to use an analogy, if you're a wombat surrounded by kangaroos, you feel this tremendous pressure to hang out with a bunch of, your kangaroo mates and start jumping up and down when they all jump up and down. But that's not what a wombat does. It's not what they're great at. They're these nocturnal solitary beings who build enormous tunnels underground. So if you're a wombat trying to act like a kangaroo, it's going to be painful and hold you back. So you just take your time and, find your niche and find your sweet spot and find what works for you rather than feel this pressure. So looking back, I know there's this phrase now called failing forward. If you told me I was doing that at the time, I probably would have resented you for it, but it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Your previous speaker, was it Paul Singh,
Yeah.
spoke about just do lots of little things, try out lots of stuff. And I think that's what I was doing over 15 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah. And I'm finding that to be a little bit of a trend with a lot of the people that I'm interviewing. I just interviewed somebody out of Rotterdam, Holland, a musician named Moods. And we had like a random story where I got asked to give this person, I don't even know who they were, a ride to the airport. And I was like, sure, why not? And it turns out it's this guy, drop him off. He tells me a musician. I'm like, oh, cool. We have a great conversation. Drop him off at the airport. I'm like, hey, man, good luck with your music career. In my mind, I'm like, yeah, I've met a lot of musicians and a lot of them are early on. And so I pull this guy up on Spotify. I'm like, oh, man, I'm a jerk. He's got like 8 million, 8 million streams. So talking with him, he said that he spent almost 10 years like just trying a bunch of different things in music before he launched his band now called Moods, and now it's like really taken off. So I think that's just like a general theme across a lot of these interviews. So something I'm definitely going to remember moving forward myself. And it's something worth, I mean, for whoever's listening out there, if you see something pop up on like Meetup or Facebook or whatever, that's some type of an event or who knows that you might just like have a tiny bit of interest in, just go try it once. And I mean, even if you're bad at it, if it's like, maybe it's a dance class or improv or whatever, like it's okay to be bad at stuff for a while. It's kind of how you figure out what you like to do, though.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I don't know. I'll get off my soapbox now, but uh, Joe, I want to say thank you for taking the time to join us today. I have a few kind of standard questions that we ask all of our guests on the show. So the first one is, what does your daily routine look like? Or it could be daily routine or morning routine, something that you try to do on a daily basis.
There is no daily routine. Mine's more like jazz. If it was jazz played by someone with no musical training whatsoever, I just,
Yeah.
what? I'm the personality type where my mantra would be "Don't fence me in," and so I just kind of do whatever I need to do every day and try not to have too much of a routine. Having said that, I would say over the last year, um, meditation, like some type of meditation practice on a daily basis, has started to make its way into my routine, as well as working out. So that would be it. As long as I can accomplish those two things, I'm good to go. And then from there, just whatever needs to happen.
Right. What got you into meditating and working out? Was it something that you just decided one day, like, this sounds like a good idea. I've seen all the TechCrunch articles about the benefits of your career on this, or how did that happen for you?
No, it was not. It was actually a huge wake up call. I went in one day for a very routine health screening, and they came back and said, "You know what? You've got cancer, and it's a very small early one, and you're going to be fine, and I'm completely cancer free now." But Trevor, that was a game changer. That really changed everything. So to get through that time and that treatment, I started meditating just as a survival instinct, and it got me through, and I stuck with it. So there you go. You probably didn't expect that answer to that question.
No, I didn't. I had no idea. Well,
Last year.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear you're better, but that completely caught me off guard. Um,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
yeah. As it did me as well at the time.
yeah. Well, yeah. Like I said, I'm really, I'm really glad you're okay. How long ago was that?
Thank you. That was almost exactly a year ago.
Wow. Yeah, that had. Yeah, I can. I'm really thankful that you're okay, but I imagine that has a lot of. Imagine it had a lot of like life-changing effects on you.
Yeah, it did. So health and meditation has become a huge priority. And just another really unexpected thing was just seeing who I want to spend my time around. I was saying to a friend of mine around that time, I'm like, I just don't want to spend so much time around people that I feel aren't on my side or, a positive force in my life. And my friend said, "Oh, so it's Team Joe or GTFO." So that's been that's kind of been my perspective right now on who I spend time with.
I think that's a really good way of filtering out like who you take coffee with or who you're spending your time around. Because I mean, just from my experience, like if you're around people who are positive all day, you get home from work or the office or hang out with them, and you just kind of have that little like extra pep in your step. So, and the same can be said on the opposite side, where if everyone's kind of like, yeah, today's okay, and you kind of get home and you're just like, why do I feel so worn out?
Yeah, some people do have a way of just sucking the life out of you, and I think it's okay. You can give yourself permission to not spend as much time around them.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned one book earlier, Good to Great, but I want to ask you, what's your favorite or most impactful book that you've read?
Oh, my favorite one right now, and I'm so excited to talk about it, is called The Willpower Instinct, by Kelly McGonigal, who's a Stanford professor who offered a class on willpower. And when she did that, was just unexpectedly swamped with people who wanted to participate in this very data-driven, very well-researched class on what willpower is and how to get more of it. And I forget what she said in her book, but it was something like they had to scale up the size of the lecture hall, the auditorium, 3 times, just because people wouldn't stop registering for it. And so the book really breaks down step by step the class that she led on willpower. It's really valuable. Things like working out and meditating, big surprise, are great builders of willpower. So a lot of the stuff that she talks about, that really is validated by scientific research, is stuff that's fairly simple to do. So I've become a huge advocate for that book.
Yeah. As soon as you said that, I was like, I feel like that name sounds familiar. I could be wrong. There was a McGonagall that was interviewed by Tim Ferriss around some of those similar topics. And I mean, willpower has been like a huge, something I really started looking into around a year ago, like the research behind it. And I like your point about, or that you brought up about meditation and exercise actually building it up. Because I think a lot of, well, from some of the books that I've read, like the one thing, we've talked about it a million times on this podcast so far, but it talks about how, like, if you're not careful how you spend your willpower throughout the day, you get closer to the end of the day and you can't, like, you just feel wiped out. You can't get anything done. You start making, you grab the Cheetos and Coke instead of like the salad and the water, those types of things. But if you meditate and exercise, it seems to make, like, it's almost like a little boost for your willpower.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think a key is just knowing, what energizes you versus what depletes you when it comes to, having the willpower to go do the things you need to do, even in those moments when you don't really feel like it.
Yeah, it's making the tough choices, or I don't know, maybe they're not tough choices, but having the willpower to make the choice that is the right choice instead of the easy choice.
Yeah, it could be life-changing just in these little moments of making the right step, the right choice, can add up hugely over time.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say is the most important lesson you learned from your parents growing up?
Oh, I like that question. I think it's that it's never too late to reinvent. So both of my parents made big career changes, just massive pivots, in their late 40s or 50s, and have done really well. Like, my mum was a primary school librarian all her career, and suddenly just one day went, enough, and just quit, and got certified to teach English as a second language, and went on to live in the Czech Republic and Poland and Morocco and Bulgaria over the next 10 years, and Turkey. In fact, going to Istanbul was to see some of the places where she lived. And my dad went from being, like an executive director for different nonprofits to being kind of this motivational guru around health and fitness for people in the latter half of life. So hugely inspiring to see them make that leap.
Oh, that's awesome. It's not something you see very often either, where people are in like the later stages of their career and then just kind of do a complete, I don't even know if I'd call it a 180, maybe a 360. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, and I think it's great to know that's possible. I think about that a lot, and it just really gives me heart that whatever you're doing today is not necessarily what you always need to be doing if you decide that it's not the right fit for you.
Yeah, it makes me really it makes me sad and feel bad for some people, like even in their 20s, that are like, well, this is just the way it has to be. I just got to do this, and I'm like, no, you don't. You don't have to do anything like that. You can change your mind. So I think that's really good advice, or a good lesson that you learned from them. So what do you do for fun in your free time when you're not gallivanting around the world? What do you do for fun?
Travel. So one of my favorite things to do is, so I have friends all over the world now as a result of that gallivanting and moving to a different country. One of my favorite things to do is just like grab a beer or a glass of wine or something even stronger and Skype with friends. So drunk Skype with friends all around the place.
Oh
Really?
my God. That I want to
Yeah.
try. I want to try that now because that's I yeah. There's I'm already thinking of like a list in my head of all the people. I'm like I kind of want to grab a scotch and just like hang out in like a group chat and just.
It is officially Friday afternoon. It's a couple minutes after noon, so we could start now, but we probably shouldn't, Trevor. And then the other thing I do, and honestly, and this feeds back into the willpower instinct, I am trying like crazy to stay off Twitter because it's so addictive. In fact, just heard this great study recently. So Microsoft in Canada studied the extent to which our addiction to these small devices is depleting our ability to focus. And what they found is since the year 2000, people's attention span, due to all this technology that we're constantly, reaching for and interrupted by, our attention span has gone from 12 seconds, which is the amount of time you could focus on something before distracting yourself. It's fallen from 12 seconds to 8 seconds. Now, as a comparison point, the attention span of a goldfish is actually 9 seconds.
Oh wow.
So
That that's that seems a little insane. I know exactly what you're talking about though. I'm hoping that I can get this guy as a guest here coming up. I sent him an email, so cross your fingers. There's a book called Deep Work by a guy named Cal Newport, where he really talks about how a lot of the highest achievers really throughout history have figured out ways to isolate themselves from these distractions, whether it's oh shoot, I'm gonna forget his name. Carl Jung, how he built like a little. I'm probably gonna mess this up. So if somebody actually knows the true story, like message me and tell me what it is. But this is how I remember it: is he built some type of like little tiny house or like a little shack on his property, and he would go there and just like no distractions, no music, no nothing, just his books, his papers, and like pen, and he would just work for hours with just focusing on a specific task. So yeah, if you're interested in learning more about that, check out Deep Work by Cal Newport. It's really good.
I'm writing it down.
Perfect. I can message it to you later as well. Uh, okay, so what's something that you learned this week?
That goldfish statistic, and it rocked me to the core. I am doing my best to step away from the addictive, the iPhone and the Twitter, and try not to have so many goldfish moments.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Mine's not Twitter, it's email and Facebook because I'm always like, well, since I've, run ads and stuff, I'm like scoreboard watching. I'm like, how many clicks did I get? And then "Duh." I'm like, it's not going to change if I wait an hour to check this. What am I doing? So yeah, if you figure out a way to limit the amount of times that you check Twitter, let me know. I'd be happy to implement it.
Okay.
All right, so final question just before we wrap this up. And like I said, I really thank you for taking the time. I always enjoy talking with you or sharing a coffee. Now I know that we'll have to grab a scotch or a wine or a whiskey next time. But yeah, if somebody wants to get a hold of you or check out any of your stuff, how would they do so?
So if they're interested in just talking to me about a speaking engagement for a women's corporate network initiative or a women's professional conference, then joemiller.net is where I have information, my bio, my topics and videos, etc. But that's a fairly unique niche of people that might be listening in. On the other hand, if you just are interested in how to lead, climb and thrive in a corporate career or want to stay in touch with me, beleaderly.com. Is my blog, and sign up for the newsletter and we can stay in touch that way.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrap for this week's show. Thank you for tuning in. Now, if you want to follow up with anything with Jo or check out any of the stuff that she's working on, go ahead and head over to her Facebook at Be Leaderly. That's BE Leader with an LY at the end. Or go ahead and check out Jo's leadership coaching website, which is womensleadershipcoaching.com. Or you can find Jo on Twitter. That's JO_MILLER. Now, in following up with one of the last questions that I asked Jo, she shared some information about some things that she'd gone through over the last year or so. And I just want to leave everyone with a quick message, and that is, you never know what challenges or what anybody else is going through. So take some time today and reach out to somebody that you care about or somebody that's important to you and just tell them thank you. Tell them how much you appreciate them in your life. People don't hear it enough, and taking that couple minutes today just to do that could mean a lot to that person. On another note, if you think you would enjoy hearing more podcasts, getting some blog posts, some ebooks, or some articles that I have written, or some people at Helix Academy have written, go ahead and head over to helixacademy.co and sign up for our newsletter. That's all for this week, and I look forward to you tuning in next time. This episode of The Formula was produced by Helix Academy, edited by Luke Krieger, and the music was provided by the artist known as Moods. Make sure and check him out on Facebook or Spotify. That's MOODS.